Okay, should we get started? Bismillah, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barak wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So last week we had started to look at the journey of Isra wal Mi'raj. And we started going through some of the text that is collated around the various hadith that describe the journey. And I think we had just started to get into it a little bit. And so we're going to pick up where we left off and try to kind of go through it as much as we can. But I'll read the beginning part that we went through, just because it was a little bit. And I think we went through the part where the angel Jibreel opens the chest of the Prophet ﷺ and cleanses his heart, puts in various virtues and values into it. Right? Does that sound like where we left off? Yeah. Okay. Bismillah. And so the Shaykh writes, in the name of Allah, most merciful, most beneficent, blessings and peace upon the Messenger of Allah and his family and companions. As the Prophet ﷺ was in Al-Hijr at the house, lying down at rest between two men, Jibreel and Mikael came to him. With them was a third angel, Israfil. They carried him until they brought him to the spring of Zamzam, where they asked him to lie on his back, and Jibreel took him over from the other two. Another version says, the roof of my house was opened, and Jibreel descended. He split the Prophet's chest from his throat to the bottom of his belly. Then Jibreel said to Mikael, bring me a vessel of water from Zamzam, so that I will purify his heart and expand his chest. He took out his heart and washed it 3 times, removing from it what was wrong. Mikael went back and forth to him with the vessel of water from Zamzam 3 times. Then he brought him a golden vessel filled with wisdom and belief, which he emptied into his chest. He filled his chest with hilm, intelligence, patience, and good character, knowledge, certainty, and submission. Then he closed it up. He sealed it between his shoulders with the seal of prophethood. So this is where we paused last time, right? Essentially, the Prophet ﷺ is being made ready for this journey now that he's going to undertake. He's going from the city of Mecca to Jerusalem. He's going to ascend into the heavens. And there's a lot of different things that we extrapolate from this hadith. But we said, contextualizing, that this is coming now at the aftermath of a really difficult period thus far of prophethood. That he had, in the initial stage of prophethood, a secret phase of propagation where they were cultivating a smaller community, but nobody was really in their business. And then after 2 to 3 years, the command is given to propagate in a public manner, and they start to deal with the persecution, the tribulation, the trials. There's a lot of challenges that step forward in terms of beatings. We have people who are now being murdered, killed. The Prophet ﷺ himself sustains severe tragedy in the format of boycott. His uncle passes away. His wife Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha passes away after the boycott takes place. He goes to Taif, and rather than being welcomed in, he is abused by the people of Taif, pelted with stones as he leaves. And Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj represents now a moment of ease that we looked at last week, aside from the verses of Surah Al-Isra and Surah Al-Najm that talk about Isra and Mi'raj. We looked at particular verses of Surah Al-Sharh where Allah Azza wa Jal says, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, that indeed with hardship there comes ease, indeed with hardship there comes ease. And many would say that this is the ease that this prophet is like sustaining in the aftermath of the hardship that he has sustained, right? And so we want to think about it through that prism of what it is that he is getting readied for and how it is that that preparation is taking place. And we kind of talked about the importance of various things relevant to the heart, but in particular, as the angel Jibreel is removing certain things and cleansing it, he's purposely filling it with things that are of benefit also, right? So there's kind of two methods to it, that you're not just letting out, but you're conscious about what you're putting in to fill some of the space in the vacuum as the heart is kind of being emptied, so to speak. And so from here now, he goes into a depiction about the Burak. And so he says, then he brought the Burak, handsome-faced and bridled, a tall white beast, bigger than a donkey but smaller than the mule. He could place his hooves at the farthest boundary of his gaze. He had long ears. Whenever he faced a mountain, his hind legs would extend, and whenever he went downhill, his front legs would extend. He had 2 wings on his thighs, which lent strength to his legs. So the Burak is this animal that the Prophet ﷺ is riding on this majestic journey. The angel Jibreel ﷺ is now bringing forth this beast. And we've likely heard of it if we've heard of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, but we depict it kind of sometimes conceptually as something that looks like a horse, but the animal in and of itself isn't necessarily given like so many depictions, other than the way that it's being described in real time has to be in a mode that gives understanding to the people around them as to how they can conceptualize and fathom what this creature actually is. Do you know? But it wouldn't be a good depiction to say the Burak was like a horse that had wings, right? Many people are of the opinion that he didn't even have wings, right? So when we said the Seerah literature doesn't necessarily adopt like the same kind of classifications and criteria as like hadith literature does, you know, it is not necessarily deriving from this particular doctrinal, theological rulings or legalistic rulings. But we know that if we were to think out what this animal looked like, it is given this depiction to give us an understanding that the Prophet has the capacity to mount it, and the way that we could understand it is that it's like a average size animal. This is why he's giving these kind of depictions between this donkey and a mule, right? So it's not small, nor is it like huge, but somewhere in the middle. And the nature of what it is that it's being described as now has qualities that are not typical to what it is that we really experience in this existence. And so the notion that it has this capacity to move at such a distance that, as far as its gaze can see, essentially encompasses a stride. Do you know what I mean? And so you'd want to think about, right? Like I can see all the way to the Empire State Building. Do you know? Different animals, I mean, it's right there. It's not it's hard to see, right? And you can see past it. There's certain animals whose vision is that much more kind of remarkable, subhanAllah, right? And some whose vision is much less. But the Burak has this capacity, and any hurdles that is coming in its way, it also has this uniqueness in that it's not kind of removed from its purpose or its pathway. Do you see what I mean? Horses and animals of burden are depicted in a lot of different ways in the hadith and the Quran. And I wanted us to look at Surah Adiyat really quickly so that we can kind of get an idea of some of what it is that we're talking about here. It's the 100th chapter of the Quran. If people can open it. If somebody can just read the first 5 verses, the English or the Arabic, but we could read both. Yeah, Hassan, go ahead. Sure.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعاديات ضبحا فالموريات قدحا فالمغيرات سبحا فوثرن به نقعا فوسطن به جمعا إن الإنسان ربه لقنود وإنه على ذلك لشهيد وإنه لحب الخير لشديد أفلا يعلم إذا بعثر ما في القبور وحصل ما في الصدور إن ربهم بهم يومئذ لخبير. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, most merciful, by the racers panting, and the producers of sparks when striking, and the chargers at dawn, stirring up thereby clouds of dust, arriving thereby in the center collectively. Indeed, mankind is to his Lord is ungrateful, and indeed he is to that a witness, and indeed he is in love of wealth intense. But does he not know that when the contents of the graves are scattered, and that within the breaths is obtained, indeed their Lord with them that day is fully acquainted.
Great. So the first set of verses here that are taking oaths, they're depicting horses, right? And so you want to kind of experience this in real time. وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا, right? In Arabic, if like you have an enemy, a transgressor, they're called udwan, right? They're going past limits. So the adiyat has the same root, and the idea is that these horses are moving so fast, like they're pushing past any limits whatsoever, the ones that are being depicted in this surah. And dabha, and as they're doing this, they're like breathing heavy. Do you know? فَالْمُورِيَاتِ قَدْحًا, the depiction here, right? Like ira here in the Arabic, it's like, you know, when you take metal and it's striking against something, it's going to make a spark. So they're moving so fast, these sparks are coming out of the base of their hooves, do you know? And think about the person who's hearing this in real time, because a steed is a noble animal within the Meccan society, right? Like horses are no joke in this society. They're the equivalent of what you would understand to be like the most expensive of vehicles, do you know? And there's a lot of nobility to a horse. Has anybody ever ridden a horse before? Right? They're beautiful creatures, do you know? Huh? They're scary? Yeah, my son is scared of horses. We've gone horseback riding, and every time he rides a horse, the horse always like messes around with him in some way. I don't know why, poor guy. And then like the horses we're riding also mess with him only. But he keeps getting back up, mashallah. فَالْمُورِيَاتِ قَدْحًا. So try to picture these horses in your head, right? They're like running, pushing beyond limits, the adiyat, right? They're going super fast, and they're like breathing heavy as they're doing this. They're moving at such a pace that as their feet strike the ground, like it's creating these sparks that only like a hoof or like metal striking against something can do. If you've ever seen something like that. فَالْمُغِيرَاتِ صُبْحًا, right? They're essentially engaged in this behavior in the morning. And so this is a pack of horses that is now going into the midst of some kind of battle, and they're doing it in broad daylight. Like they're so confident in what it is that's taking place that they're not trying to creep up on you. They're just coming at you, and they want you to know that we want you to see us. Do you see what I mean? فَأَثَرْنَ بِهِ نَقْعًا, that the movement here now is such that it's creating these clouds of dust and dirt around them. This is a Arabian society. There's going to be sand. There's going to be land that kind of has that capacity as you're moving. فَوَسَطْنَ بِهِ جَمْعًا, and then they go right into the middle of whoever it is that they're going to attack. Do you know? It's essentially like if it was me versus all of you, I came up on you, said, I'm here, and jumped right in the middle, come and get me, right? This is what these horses are doing. Now you want to understand how Quran relates to itself Usually the oath in the interpretations of things attaches itself to kind of the meaning that's in the latter part of the chapter. So here now you have Innal insana li rabbihi lakanud. Kanud is like a particular type of ingratitude, deeper than like what we understand most forms of ingratitude to be. So indeed, insan, humanity, towards their Rabb is ungrateful, right? So you juxtapose this to this vivid imagery that's being cast into the minds of these people hearing this revelation. This majestic group of horses running in unison as fast as they can, pushing themselves to the limit, breathing as deeply and heavily as possible at such a speed that literal sparks are coming out of their hooves. They're going in such a way where in broad daylight, they're visible. So you can see every gesture and every motion, and the ones that they're running to, they know that this is happening. The movement is at such a pace that dust and dirt starts to come up, and when everything around them is kind of settled, they're right in the middle of everyone that they were running towards. It's gonna attract the attention of the listener. And then the very next thing that Allah says is, humanity is ungrateful to me. You see? So you catch the attention, and you then are in a place where the principle is driven. What's the relationship to that verse and these horses? Innal insana li rabbihi lakanud, to the depiction of this group of horses doing what it is that they're doing. Does the question make sense? So just so we can get started talking a bit, it's going to be relevant to the conversation on the Buraq, right? How does that group of horses relate to this message now? Innal insana li rabbihi lakanud wa innahu ala dhalika la shaheed. That you're just a witness to that yourself. وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ, right? The word khair here is not good, but what the Mufassirin say, it's like in relation to wealth in particular, that their love of wealth is shadid, right? Like in Arabic, if you know Arabic, if you have a shadda on a letter, the shadda is so powerful that the letter allies to the letter preceding it and also has its own syllable, right? So it's like strong, severe, right? So their love of wealth is so severe. Do you know? But just that first verse, Innal insana li rabbihi lakanud, and you can look at the other ones too. How does it relate to these horses that are moving in this way? If you can just turn to the person next to you so we can get talking a little bit, like saying some names if you don't know names. Like what is it that we can see as a connection point there? And just think about it, you know? This group of horses doing this thing, and this idea that humanity is ungrateful. Let's discuss for a minute, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Go ahead. Okay, so what do we think? Like, how do these things connect to each other? The depiction of these horses, the oaths that Allah is taking by the horses, right? And we're not like doing tafsir, but like Allah can take oath by His creation. Do you know that's why we see this again and again in the Quran? So He made these horses. He can take oath by them. We only take oath like by Allah. But what's the relationship here of anything that's like coming to people's minds? Yeah. Yeah, right? هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا, that He is the one that made the earth submissive to you, dalul, right? Any other thoughts, like any things that people discussed you want to add to this? Good. So for the purpose of what we're talking about here, right? The horse just does what the rider makes the horse do. If the rider wasn't commanding the horse to run at that speed and go into the midst of whatever it is that it's going into the midst of, why would it do that? Do you know? And the nature is as such that the horse is just taking commands from its master. Does that make sense? Understand that now in the prism of the horse being a noble creature. That it's not seen as an act of disgrace, but an act of nobility. That it knows how to be subservient to its master. Do you understand? Nobody says, like, look at how degrading that horse is. It let me ride it in the way that I rode it, right? The people describe horses to be majestic, creatures of beauty. If you're driving down the street, especially in New York, and you're in a place where you are not in the middle of New York City, and every animal that passes you by, right? My kids, when we rent a car and we're driving south anywhere or upstate, I feel like I've deprived them of so many things. So there's like random animals. It's not even like crazy. It's like, Baba, look, there's a raccoon on the street, you know? Or, you know, and then when we see like herds of cows or like horses in large packs or passing farms, there's beauty to certain things, right? And you can juxtapose these to animals that you can still find beauty in, but nobody looks at like a porcupine and says, oh, so beautiful. Do you know what I mean? Nobody looks at a skunk and says, I wish it came closer to me. Or even if you have a bee or a wasp near you, like if you get close to the bee and really see what it looks like, it's remarkable, but it still evokes like a certain response, right? I don't know most people who see a horse and say, that thing is so ugly. But they're always commenting just on how regal it is, right? And this regal animal has submissiveness to it. It draws upon nobility that can only be reached in this state of willingness to submit to what makes sense. And if you deepen in this, the rider has a challenge, and the ingratitude can have us be seen in two folds. I'm either the horse or I'm the one controlling the horse. And the horse is just gonna do what I utilize it for. I can see it as a ni'mah or it can be a fitna. I can use it as a blessing and a gift in the way Allah intended me to use it, or I could use it in a way that Allah did not intend for me to use it. But it's gonna do what it is that it's supposed to do. Do you know? And that's listen to me. And so, as an extension of me, I can use it for other than what it was intended. And in both frames, we can see like where does this capacity of kanud come in? Do you know? It doesn't have the element of shukr, right? It doesn't like evoke this idea, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. You see numerous hadith that mention horses, the beauty of horses, the likeness of individuals who kind of made wudu in certain ways and what they'll look like in terms of their illumination and luminosity, similar to particular types of horses that had a certain like vibrancy to them in the ways that they're kind of, I don't know what you call like a horse's stole. Is it a stole of a horse? It's not like fur on a horse or hair. What is it? What do you call like the way you have like wool on a sheep? What is like the thing of a horse? Hair? Is it hair? Not the mane, but like the rest of it. Huh? Hair? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound as nice when you're like, it's got such beautiful hair on this horse, right? But like, let's say the mane, right? Because the mane just sounds more like poetic, right? At least to me. But you know, like there's a lot that's there. And when the Prophet is describing Burak to people, and he's experiencing Burak, there's going to be a recognition that he's talking about a beast that they understand has nobility. And the mode now that comes up is one that Burak has this capacity as this creature that Allah has sent with the angel Jibra'il, like the chieftain of the angels. Whatever is about to happen, the Prophet doesn't know, but he knows it's got to be something that's like really important, because Jibra'il came down not alone, but with Mikhail and Israfil, and there's this beautiful thing that can move in this way that it's called Burak because it's as fast as lightning. Do you know? The Prophet has to be ready for whatever it is that's going to happen and experience movement in this way without it creating challenge. Because the way we said last time, right? Rahim said, like, look at his relationship as it's molded and grown with Jibra'il. The first time he saw him and the second time, he's filled with doubt. He doesn't know what's going on. And now they're very close. This is his teacher, the angel Jibra'il. So he has to have capacity and wherewithal to also engage this beast. And the beast has to be able to understand who is this individual that's coming towards me. So if you've ever gotten on a beast of burden that is not aware of who you are, they're not going to just lightly let you come on top of them. You have to gain some capacity of trust. And quite often, when you're a novice rider, you leverage the trust of the one that has been in the horse is under the care of that individual, and that one says, like, it's okay that this one is riding on you. You get what I mean? Because think about what these horses go through, right? The first time we put our kids on a horse, my son was probably like 4 years old or 5 years old. Do you know what I mean? My kids, like my daughter is very poised. My son is growing up into like a poised young man too. But when they were little kids, they were like little children, you know? My daughter had no qualms and no fear, but she'd go like pull on dogs' tails. I'm like, you cannot do that. That dog will eat your face. Like, what are you doing? Do you know? And so these animals have to have like a certain patience, right? They have to have a certain willingness to let people who are inexperienced and also potentially disrespectful, like challenging in a lot of different ways, like ride them and mount them, you know? And if you push them too far, it's not going to necessarily go well, but they leverage the trust of the ones that they trust to say, this one is okay to ride you too. And so as it moved forward, right, after the depiction of the Burak, speaking of the Burak, it says, he, Burak, bucked when the Prophet came to mount him. Jibreel put his hand on his mane and said, are you not ashamed, O Burak? By Allah, no one has ridden you in all creation more dear to Allah than he is. Hearing this, the Burak was so stricken with shame that he sweated until he became soaked, and he stood still so that the Prophet mounted him. Do you know? The Prophet ﷺ has elevated status amongst creation. And the Burak, still being a creature created by Allah, you have like people who came to visit the Prophet of God for the first time and they couldn't tell who he was from his companions, right? There's nothing that plasters like images, and iconography is not something that our tradition really embraces the way other religions like embrace. We don't necessarily have like things that are globally symbolic around Islam for a variety of reasons. There's certain things that might allude to particular cultures, particular theologies, particular practices, particular like ideologies and traditions. But the way that you have a cross that all Christians can get behind, the way you have a Star of David that all Jewish people can get behind, you don't necessarily have one individualized symbol that every single Muslim says that I connect or relate to this in some way. Do you see what I mean? Right? And here, the Prophet ﷺ is also going to be recipient of this reality that this majestic creature is also in a place where mention of who Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is brings him to a place of order. You have to understand like the humility of the Prophet of God. Our narrations tell us that he is known by others based off of just how creation responds to him, right? The heat of the Arabian desert doesn't plague him because clouds would follow him as he walked. This is what our tradition teaches us. And you can hear this through the form of deference and respect, but also try to understand, what would your ego do if you walked when it was sunny and a cloud gave you shade everywhere? Do you know what I mean? Like if I walk down the street and people are sweating bullets and they're like, why aren't you sweating bullets? I'm like, I got my cloud right here. You know? That's not like a typical thing, you see? And the opportunities that avail the Prophet or the Prophet is availed of, they have difficulty, but there's also things that fundamentally you can only understand through saying, what kind of like human must this have been that even after he has these experiences, he's telling people like, feed the hungry, take care of the orphans. He gives others before he feeds himself. He smiles at everyone that he greets. He still believes when things aren't going well, it's because he might have done something wrong. Do you know? In a metaphysical realm, everything in creation has capacity to be aware of the Prophet of God in this way. And so all Jibreel alayhi salam has to do is tell Burak, do you know who this is? The most beloved of God. And the Burak is in a place where attentiveness just comes, right? And the Prophet doesn't get like haughty-toddy. There's no arrogance, like, yeah, I'm the messenger of God. Why are you doing this? It's not like who he is. That's not his character. Do you know what I mean? And as you engage this, it doesn't always have to be a hadith that says, good character is X, right? You can see from the way he interacts with all elements of creation how we extrapolate lessons and say, I should probably try to embody character like this as well. And it's not feigned humility, but you don't buy into the hype necessarily, and you are in a place where you always recognize that complacency is not what I'm striving for, contentment is what I'm striving for. Do you know what I mean? And if you can tap into like what must be going on in the head of the messenger of God at this point, like what am I about to go on? What is it that's about to like happen with me? And how do I reconcile some of these things in the nature of not in a vacuum, but he has experienced more than a decade now of real difficult life experiences. Grief, anxiety, stress, firsthand at the loss of loved ones, people that he loves being boycotted, abused, killed because they follow what it is that he's teaching and what it is that he's inviting them to. And this is the place where he is still like demonstrating in the midst of all of this, like good character, right? Adas comes with what it is that's offered to him. He's still like asking him who he is and what he's about, right? There's adab, there's etiquette. Do you see what I mean? It's like the point of the religion. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِيُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. That I was sent to perfect like ethical conduct, good behavior, right? He's treating all of these things, whether he has a relationship pre-existing or not. The other thing that we can understand from this is that when Jibreel says to Buraq that no one has ridden you more dearer to Allah than he, that means that others have ridden Buraq before, right? So by principles of logic, if no one else that has ridden you is more beloved, it then gives us a base to understand that others have also ridden Buraq before. That it's not that only the Prophet of God rode Buraq uniquely, nor was this the only journey that Buraq was ridden, but there were others in creation who have ridden Buraq. Do we know all of them? No, Allah knows best. But there's a purpose that Buraq also fills. And so as we move forward, the Sheikh, he writes in the text that other prophets used to mount the Buraq before. Sayyid ibn Musayyib, rahimahullah, said that it was the beast of Ibrahim, which he used to mount whenever he traveled to the sacred house. Allah knows best. Jibreel alayhi salam then departs with him, meaning like they're moving now, okay? The Buraq, Jibreel alayhi salam, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he placed himself on his right while Mikhail was on his left. And in Ibn Sa'ad's version, it says, the one holding his stirrup was Jibreel, and the one holding the reins of the Buraq was Mikhail. And so you want to, like, kind of, as best as you can, picture, like, what's happening here, right? They're moving from Mecca now, and they're going to move at a speed that these angels move. This horse can, like, stride as far as its vision can see. And what we said last time was that this was actually an experience that the Prophet has, mind, heart, soul, and body. It's not just something that's like inspirational, something that's taking place purely at like a metaphysical level, but his entire being is experiencing this. They traveled until they reached a land filled with date palms. Jibreel said to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, alight and pray here. He did so and remounted. Then Jibreel said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibreel said, you prayed in At-Tayba, and the migration will take place there. Right? Tayba is another name for Yathrib, which we know becomes named Medina. The Prophet ﷺ like descends, and we're understanding also like kind of a roadmap that's taking place. The Burak continued his lightning flight, placing his hooves wherever his gaze could reach. Jibrail then said again, alight and pray here. He did so and remounted. Then Jibrail said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibrail said, you prayed in Madian. And this is a city on the shore of the Red Sea that borders Tabuk near the valley of the Prophet Shu'aib. And where they stopped was at the tree of Musa alayhi salam. So this is where the Prophet Moses takes a rest as he is deeply exhausted from like fatigue and hunger from fleeing from Fir'aun. The Burak continues and his lightning flight, and then Jibrail says again, alight and pray here. He did so and remounted. Then Jibrail said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibrail said, you prayed at the mountain of Sina, right? Mount Sinai. This is where Allah Azza wa Jal addresses Musa alayhi salam. Then he reached a land where the palace of Seerah became visible to him. Jibrail said to him, alight and pray. He did so and remounted. Then the Burak continued his lightning flight, and Jibrail said, do you know where you prayed? He said, no. Jibrail said, you prayed in Beit Lahem, right? What we know as Bethlehem, where Isa ibn Maryam, peace be upon them both, was born. Why do you think the Prophet ﷺ is being taken to these places and being brought to a place where purposefully now he engages in this ritual practice of salah? So try to like remember everything that we've talked about. The mandated 5 daily prayers have not come yet, right? That's going to come on Isra and Miraj. But we said one of the first things that the Prophet was given was like an understanding from Jibrail on how to pray, make wudu. The Prophet and Khadija would pray. Ali radiallahu anh sees them because he's residing with them, right? And he then like enters Islam through these conversations with the Prophet. They all prayed together. There's different understandings of like what that would look like, but there wasn't these mandated prayers that we have at this juncture. But you know, qum al-layla ila qalila, like stand in the night, even you know a portion of it, right? So he is praying the way that we pray with our postures. But why? Like, why would there be a stoppage at these particular places on the way? And this isn't where he's going to pray in Jerusalem, Beit al-Maqdis, with like all of the prophets of God, right? He's praying in these spots, descending and praying and kind of getting back up onto Burak. If you can turn to the persons next to you, like, why do we think this is a part of this journey? Like, what is it that is coming up as a result of this, right? And think about it, the people who we're mentioning in the spots that he's praying, right? The Prophet Shu'aib, Musa alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, Maryam, peace be upon her, right? But let's discuss for a few minutes and then we'll come back and talk. Go ahead.
like a really hard time, right? With Ta'at, all these different things. He's really taking a toll on him physically, emotionally, mentally. He's really struggling in a sense, you know what I mean? This is sort of the difficult part of his life. And he's just trying to going to pray all these key places. Like he's being reminded, remember the story of Musa, remember the story of Ibrahim, of Isa, all these prophets went through difficulty as well, just like you did. Maybe Ibrahim's father took the throne in a fire. Maybe Musa, went through similar things as he was fleeing Fir'aun. In all of those, prophetic lives, there's always a point of near hopelessness or difficulty. Obviously, he wasn't hopeless. You know what I mean? But there's always a point that mirrors where the prophet was at the difficult moment. Even, it's going and seeing, praying in these places. What is prayer? Prayer is essentially the remembrance of Allah. What are the first? Remember Allah. Understand that, whatever difficulty you're going through, it'll be resolved just as all these previous difficulties were resolved.
Okay, so what do we think? What's like some of the connections here that we're making? Why these particular places is the prophet taking a pause, and why is he taking a pause and praying there also, right? What do we discuss? What do we come up with? Why are you smiling so much, man? You Jesus, what's going on over here?
So it was a good conversation.
Yeah? What did you talk about? What was good?
So we were had a really good discussion, alhamdulillah. Very insightful from all the brothers. One thing we were sort of theorizing, I guess, would be, up until this moment, the prophets had a really hard time, with Ta'if, everything, with Khadija passing away, Abu Talib. It's been really difficult for them, obviously. Now, we're coming to this moment where Allah's trying to, comfort us out in a sense. Perhaps one of the reasons why he's been taken to, the place of Ibrahim, of Musa, and of Isa, is to remember these prophetic stories as well. To remember the story of Ibrahim, the story of Musa, the story of Isa. For each one of these prophets, just like him, experienced a lot of difficulties. Nabi Ibrahim's father tried to throw him in a fire. Imagine how alone he felt. Nabi Musa was fleeing, a very powerful tyrant. You know what I mean? Imagine how he felt. Nabi Isa, his mother was accused of, bad stuff. And he, started prophethood from a very young age. So all these prophets that he's going to these places right now, they all experience difficulty. And, I think maybe he's being told to pray here because I guess prayer is just the remembrance of Allah. And to remember Allah in these places is essentially to remember that, the cause of Allah will always be successful just as it was previously. So essentially, don't worry about whatever's been happening in Ta'if, whatever. Remember the stories that, the people that came before you, and inshallah, inna ma'al usri yusra, I guess.
Yeah, amazing, mashallah. Other thoughts? Anything else? What else? That was it. Everyone had that exact same conversation? Yeah? So, think about a couple of things, right? The Prophet ﷺ, like nobody else knows what it means to be a prophet. And then he's the last prophet. And the prophet that came before him, there's 600 years in between them. And he's in a land where there's not prophets coming, right? He's lost his wife, he's lost his uncle, Taif was difficult, all of these things. And the particulars of these prophets, the Prophet Shu'aib, his people just ignored him. They didn't really listen to anything he had going on, Musa alayhi salam, it's tons of difficulties with Fir'aun, right? The Prophet Isa alayhi salam is in a place where, what happens with him? They try to kill him, right? You can't necessarily know what something feels like that you've never gone through before. And think about when you feel alone, right? You feel as if things are just not working, you're by yourself. And it's that much harder when you're sad to be sad alone. There's no comprehension, and people become so solution-oriented rather than validating of emotions. And who's going to affirm and validate like what it is the prophet's going through? He lost like two beloved people in his life back to back. And he's in a place where he's got all this difficulty, and the burdens and responsibilities of humanity till the end of time is on his shoulders, as he's also experiencing revelation, which is like a burdensome experience to go through, carry, hold, let alone disseminate. If I told you right now, go in the middle of Washington Square Park and start teaching people Quran, right? You freaked out of your mind? Like, well, no, would people look at me weird? Or, it's not an easy thing. That's not even what we're talking about. Just like the actual reality of experiencing wahi is like heavy and hard. Do you know? It's sometimes easier to talk to someone who's gone through what you've gone through, right? People come in my office, I can provide empathetic listening. I don't know what it's like to be a mother who lost her child or gone through a miscarriage. Like, I don't know. Do you know? I don't. I don't know what it's like to convert to Islam. Like, I don't know. I'm not a convert to Islam. I don't know what it's like to be a refugee. I don't know what it's like to be undocumented. I don't know what it's like to be an orphan. There's certain things fundamentally that like you just cannot know, and there's no way to assume by like analogy that this is something also that like I know as well. Empathy is the complete suspension of the nafs and everything that feeds and fuels it, and you simply understand the experience of the other through their lived experiences, not your own. And recognizing the wherewithal and capacity of the prophet of God, that nobody else is able to give an understanding of this is what it must be like for you to be the last prophet of God and go through the difficulties and trials that you go through. He's going to these places and he's with the land that testifies to the difficulty that his brothers and sister also experienced. It's like you're not alone in this, We're literally sending angels down to you like beasts that the world has never seen before. But that human experience is still something that he has because he's a man. And he's now in these places where, do you know where we just took you? We took you to where the Prophet Shuaib was rejected. Do you know where we just took you? We just took you to where Moses was exhausted. Do you know where we just took you? We just took you to where Isa was persecuted. And then you want to also understand, like, he's praying in these lands because there's Mubarak lands, right? The dua of the oppressor should be feared by the dua of the oppressed should be feared by the oppressor. Do you know? The sustaining of difficulty is a means of elevation. And our tradition teaches us that Allah stands with those who are on the right side of justice and stands with those who are oppressed and not the oppressor. And he still hasn't gotten to Jerusalem where he's going to lead every prophet in prayer and ascended into the heavens. His heart is still being made ready on the journey. So he's praying in this Mubarak land. And think about every other prophet that comes into existence. How many of them can say that we prayed in each of these spots? Medina and Mecca included. But the prophet's book and the land is testifying, right? This is Quran, right? That the earth we stand on, it tells us it's going to speak on the day of judgment, like what we did on it, right? May Allah grant us ease on that day. Whether you believe it or not, like it's gonna happen. You don't have to believe it for it to be true. So, one of the reasons why when some Muslims pray, after they pray their fard, they pray in a different spot, their sunnah, is because you want more pieces of land to testify that you prayed on it. You know? Right? That's like why you're doing it. Does that make sense? Is that what you're saying right now?
Yeah, she was saying, oh,
That's why you do it?
that's why like I moved back to it. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
There you go. Look at that. What? Yes, crazy. Right? So you want more things to say that you did right on it, right? So what our teachers tell us, if you have capacity, you go into the place that you did something wrong and you do something right on it within reason, right? So you were like drinking at some place, don't go to the place you were drinking and like do things that are gonna test your capacity, do you know? But if I stood on a spot and I yelled at my child, like I gotta stand on that spot and do a bunch of good things on it, you know? You stood on a spot and you gossiped about somebody, you stood on a spot and like you were like racist to somebody, right? And you have the capacity to go to that spot and bring some barakah by doing something good, and you acknowledge your capacity to do wrong, right? Do you see what I mean? Those pieces of earth are testifying that the Prophet prayed on them, and the act of prayer is yet again being demonstrated as a mechanism to ready yourself for an experience that is not like the ordinary. Do you know? And the paradigm shift on salah is one where you could think of it as a distraction and like put it at the end of the day, or you think about it for what it was intended to be. It's the oasis in the midst of difficulty. It's not the difficulty that's the distraction from dunya. It's the means through which you make sense of dunya better, you know? But you get out of it what you put into it. Do you see what I mean? Right? And so they literally, like, not only, like, do you think the Prophet had wudu when he was doing this? Right? But they also washed his inside before he left. You know what I mean? Like the preparation is in every sense of the word. And he's praying in these Mubarak places, and it's gonna add now to what Salah does, right? There's like pit stops along the way because the journey's just getting going, and the replenishment is not just of the external, it's of the internal as well. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? Okay. So here, like, there's these things that are happening, and it's chipping away also, right? Like, you come to a realization, you know what it's like to have difficult parents, and somebody validates the emotion. You know what it's like when you don't get along with your spouse, somebody validates it. You're in a place where, like, the hardness of the heart starts to be removed. He's experiencing, I'm not the only one that was alone in this thing. And what do? He then prays, because you're removing something and then putting something back in. Do you see what I mean? It doesn't always have to be immediate, but just like what the angel did, wash the heart, put in like the iman, put in the hilm, put in the submission, all of these good stuff. You're letting it out. You gotta be mindful about like what you're replacing it with. Do you see what I mean? And the exercise has to happen to yield what only the exercise can yield at its completion, right? So that's what it's about, you know? And you don't want to like think about it in a way that creates difficulty. You go to Medina and Mecca, don't like sit with people and be like, Khalid told us we're just supposed to pray here. No, man, there's barakah in eating the food of Medina, right? There's barakah in spending in Medina. There's barakah in all aspects of being in Medina, right? Like, you just have to have intentionality that allows for you to not experience it unconsciously, and you will experience something different. If you walk a lot in the city of New York, you're going to, by osmosis, like gain from walking. Do you know? But if you build deliberate intention into the walk, that says I'm also doing this for my physical wellness, I'm doing this for my mental wellness, it's gonna be different, right? I don't know if a lot of you exercise or not, do you know? But if you exercise and you are seeing the muscle that's being sculpted through the exercise as you exercise, our trainers, like when I used to train, you could tell, like looking at me, right, clearly, do you know? But when I was supposed to play sports in college, I had trainers in high school. I was working out sometimes 3 times a day, you know, and one of the things they would tell you, like the mirrors are not for ego, but the mirrors are to enhance the experience of the exercise because it creates more focus and attentiveness to the mechanics, and it's enabling you to bring that much more intention to it. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? It doesn't mean like if you go stare at a mirror while you're lifting a weight, you're gonna suddenly get swole in like a day, right? But just understand like the principle. Do you see? So you want to have intentionality. A lot of us don't have presence when we're praying, you know? Do you see what I mean? And then you want to understand he got off and prayed, and then when he got back on, then he was told where he prayed. He didn't pray after he was told, you're about to pray in this spot, so get ready for it. Do you see what I mean? The order isn't necessarily like sometimes the way we might think about it. I got to know everything about Mecca and Medina. I got to know everything about this and that, right? The barakah is not conditional upon your knowledge of it. It's mubarak because it's mubarak. Do you know? Your knowing that it's mubarak isn't what makes it blessed. Do you see what I mean? But then after you know it, like don't live in denial of it, right? It's like what we said when he's washing his heart with Zamzam. Like drink the Zamzam. Don't just store it in your fridge for years, right? Like drink it. That's what it's for. The blessing is to drink it and make dua is one of the times like dua is more accepted. Do you see what I mean? Right? Does that make sense? Okay, let's do this because I'm talking a lot. You can turn to the person's next to you. What are you taking away so far? Like what's coming up for people? Let's talk about it for a minute and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead.
Yeah, you didn't go last time. This guy. I think it's interesting that, you know, when the Prophet was feeling down and down, he was, you know, really thought about forgiveness, how he was reminded of the stories of Ibrahim and Sam. And, you know, these are the same stories that everybody knows. So, when we're feeling down, we need upliftment. When we're in like a similar level, maybe to a lesser degree, pick up the Quran and have a similar experience. It can be, you know, about the spiritual Prophet when people were around him. And we can have similar reflections in
appreciating that the part of the journey gives him that comfort, but gives him that shared level. Because I'd always seen the question happen for him being the prophet, like Muslim, alone. Like even though he had like the companions, he had the things that he needed to what a fire. And so he's like given this opportunity, this comfort, like here, with me, you can only live with me. So that's something that brings me comfort knowing as well.
Okay, so what are some of the things we're taking away from tonight's conversation? What's coming up for people? What did we discuss? Yeah.
Because I voiced it too. But I was saying how I always thought of and like how alone the prophet may have felt between Bottom at times, even though he was surrounded with the companions, still no one would be able to relate with exactly his experience. And so I found comfort in knowing that part of his journey was also giving him that comfort. That at the end of the day, he's gonna lead to a lot with everyone who can, perhaps relate to what he's been going through. So you might have found solace in that part of the journey alone way before even going to the garden.
Yeah, we're going to get to a place probably like 2 weeks from now. He gets to Jerusalem and he's going to pray with over 120,000 prophets, right? And the way it's depicted is that they're just in like one row. Do you know what I mean? It's not like a series of rows, one after the other after the other. So it's just all like side by side. And you're looking in every direction. And it's like, there's a lot more of us than you might realize. Do you know what I mean? And you gotta like keep this in mind, right? When you're the only Muslim in your office, the only Muslim in your family, the only Muslim in your classroom, we make up like a fifth of the world. Do you know? There's a lot more of us than we realize. And it's purposeful to make you feel alone because that's when then compromise comes in that's unwanted, like disconnection that makes us feel that much more alienated and marginalized. Do you know what I mean? Connection points don't have to be through shared externals. But if you can really like connect at La ilaha illallah, and that's what these people are doing. They're small in number, but they have a beautifully diverse community as early Muslims because they're connecting from in here. Do you know? And so there's a difference in feeling alone, which a lot of people will feel alone. But it's easier to feel by yourself if the people around us are not like really connecting at the level of hearts. Do you see what I mean? Right? So the Prophet ﷺ, like he's going through these like harrowing experiences in a very real way, right? What else like is coming up for people from today's conversation? Any takeaways? Yeah. Yeah, and you got to take the openings. Do you know? The angel came, and the prophet wasn't like, I got a meeting tomorrow, right? Do you know what I mean? Maybe somebody else like is gonna be the one to do this or that, right? Why are you letting somebody else do the good that you can do? Like, why? What are you waiting for? What are you stuck in? Do you know what I mean? He literally is like moving on the earth and then leaving like an earthly domain. And when we talked about Taif, like this was something we said. How do we reconcile the idea that he is the most beloved of Allah, and he's going through the hardship he's going through. These are not meant to be conflicting ideas, but they go hand in hand together. Other thoughts, like things that we take away from today? Yeah.
So I think it's really remarkable that when the Prophet had this, difficult time, how he was, reminded of the three stories of Musa, Ibrahim, and Isa. I think it's really remarkable because these same three stories are in the Quran. So just as he was, made to reflect upon these stories to gain solace for himself in his difficult time, which is, way more difficult than ours. We can do the same things, when we have like lesser difficulties, whatever we're going through. You know what I mean? Whether it's family, relationships, school, whatever. If we're ever in a place where we need some ease or some solace, perhaps we can reflect upon these, the same stories that the Prophet did, Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa, to draw similar conclusions that would help us and to reach the state that he reached.
Inshallah. So, a last point that you want to reflect on, and then we'll wrap up and pray Isha, right? He's the messenger of God, right? Right? It's not a trick question, right? 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 Yeah. And he's the last messenger of God. Does he know what's about to happen? Did anybody tell him in the beginning, this is all this stuff? No, right? He just was told literally, do you know where you're at, where you just prayed? He's like, I don't know. Do you know? He's still doing what he's told to do, though. Do you see what I mean? He doesn't need to know where he's being led to have trust. And he's also listening, like he's taking commands. The angel is saying, get down and pray. And he gets down and he prays. There's just no question, right? He didn't say, like, why do I have to pray? Like, why aren't you praying? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why are you telling me to pray? You didn't pray. Do you know? And this is where you want to see, like, وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا, right? Through that initial set of verses, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لِرَبِّهِ لَكَنُودٌ. The Prophet doesn't tell you to do something he doesn't do himself. So he doesn't know, like, what's happening, and he's still just doing what he's told to do. It doesn't require prisms that are rational or irrational alone. It makes sense to me or does not make sense to me. This religion that is God-centric exists on a third prism that is supra-rational. I don't have to understand it for it to be true, right? I don't need to know, like, what's going on. Do you know? I just need to know that this being that is engaging me is here in his own right, following what Allah told him to do. So I'm just going to do it because whether I know what's happening or not, I know Allah knows best. Like, and that's enough for me, right? Like, it's not ethical or moral simply because I conclude through cognitive process that it makes sense, right? Like, murder is bad, right? Yes, murder is bad, right? Do you know? But the way our religion functions, in the mode of being an abd, and this is what Surah Seerah identifies the Prophet as on this journey. We said last week, Allah names him as his abd. This is like his noble title. He's abd. Our religion is based off of the idea that murder isn't bad because you and I think it's bad. Murder is bad because Allah and His Messenger said it's bad. Do you see the difference? Integrity is good because Allah and His Messenger say it's good. Honesty is good. Truthfulness is good. Do you see? Right? Patience is good. Right? Intolerance, bad. racism, bad. You can't self-select. And if the underlying basis isn't this ideal, that I don't know even why, why are we on this horse flying across the sky? You took me from here to there, to there, to there. And then you said, get down and pray. And he just did what he was told. Why is he doing what he is told? And then you want to make all the connections, right? His heart is like in a state of utmost cleanliness. Sometimes what gets in the way is the crap that we're putting in our hearts. Because all of you is connected to the rest of you. And if you just consume and consume and consume what it is that pollutes the heart and nourishes the nafs alone, yarhamukallah, like it's going to then yield what it yields. And there's going to be like hesitation sometimes on things that you could take a pause, right? But the messenger of God who's going to lead every prophet in prayer, who carries the burden of the last revelation, who the Barak was just told, get it together, because the one who's about to ride you is more beloved to Allah than anyone else. He's still following commands. Do you understand? Right? There's no arrogance there. Do you see? Like, I don't have to know why you're telling me to do what I'm doing in order to do it. I just got to do it because you're the one that told me to do it. You know what makes that a lot easier? Like when there's love at the basis of a relationship, when there's positivity at the basis of a relationship. He's still the one when his wife asks, why do you pray in the late hours of the night? You're forgiven. Like, why are you doing it? You're good, right? أَفَلَا كُونَ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. Should I not be a grateful servant? It's positivity, positivity. He knows who the God is that he worships. He has a trust in that God, a familiarity in that God. So an uncertainty of what tomorrow holds and an unfamiliarity of the divine is a formula and recipe for paralysis and stagnation and anxiety that is unhealthy and overwhelming. But an uncertainty in tomorrow makes no difference when you have a familiarity in the one who controls tomorrow. And that's not me or you. I just got to take care of what I need to take care of. So think of the seerah altogether, right? When Abraha, who we talked about a year ago, comes with the elephants to destroy the Kaaba, and the Prophet's grandfather comes in front of him, and Abraha is so taken aback just by the sheer nobility of this man's presence that he is in a place where he gives him like his presence that he's requesting, and then he tells him, like, your men took some of my livestock, I want them back. And he says, like, I'm coming to destroy your town and people. And all you're worried about is this? And he says, that house that you're going to destroy or attempt to, like, it has its caretaker, right? Like, it has the one that looks over it, and I'm the one that looks over these things. Do you know? So that's what it is, right? The one that looks after that place will take care of it. Do you know what I mean? Do you see what I'm saying? Certitude, yaqeen, trust, deep faith that is not just spitting out codified creed. It doesn't matter if you memorize something if you don't buy into it and believe it. It's got to transcend from the tongue into the heart. And a part of it comes from just doing it even if I don't know why I'm doing it. It's an ingredient to the elevation of that inner state. And if I could push myself through it at a pace that makes sense, but you just want to understand that your prophet isn't telling you to do something that he doesn't do. He also does what he is told when he is commanded to do something. Do you see? Right? Does that make sense? Okay. What I'd like for us to do, just really quickly before we wrap up, on that last point, so it becomes concrete, let's just talk it out with the person next to us. Like, what does that bring up for us? This idea that we have a prophet that like listens to the things that he is told to do also. And like, what makes it harder for me maybe to do that, right? I don't do everything I'm supposed to do. And you gotta be comfortable with a sense that's not indifferent, but any two of us talk to each other, it's two sinners talking to each other. There's nobody in this room that could tell you that they don't do things that they're not supposed to. May Allah forgive us for it. So it makes us human. Do you know what I mean? But if I want to get to a place aspirationally, I gotta acknowledge like the obstacles that get in the way, right? So how is he built like this? How do we get to follow his example in that way, right? Not just in like the outward. Do you know what I mean? Like growing a beard might be hard for some people, right? But like that's not like it. You know, the prophetic way is not just about the adoption of what's outer, it's about like the adoption of what's inward too. I didn't mean that you can't grow facial hair, right? But like, you know, like you're in a place where like you can grow, you know what I mean, right? Like it's not just about the prophetic example of what's outward. You know, this is like an inward state that yields a kind of submission to the outward, right? So just what comes up as we kind of think about this, so that it's like an important thing. Do you know what I mean? It's really hard to gain from a God-centric religion if I pick and choose what parts of what God wants me to do, like I do suited in my own needs, right? Then I'm just making my own religion at that point. Do you know? Right? So let's talk about it for a minute, and then we'll come back and discuss, and we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Like, now you're talking about how the prophet is always submissive. So that's the same person that
Okay. So, what are some of the things we're taking away from this kind of last point? What does it bring up for us? What did we discuss? Anybody? Yeah.
Okay, I'm remembering the point you mentioned last week about how the Prophet ﷺ, and you mentioned it today, how the Prophet ﷺ had to have his heart completely washed with Zamzam. And then I think someone mentioned like, oh, I wish like that's something I could do, right? Like I wish I could just snap my fingers and have whatever is happening with me eternally fixed. And I think it made me think how the Prophet ﷺ was created so uniquely and how we're all created so uniquely to the point. Like I make this analogy all the time, but we don't like no one in this room shares the same fingerprint, right? And so how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to test us with things very, very differently. And this, I guess, skill that we're building on, like building this trust, and how the Prophet ﷺ blindly trusted, even though he didn't understand, was something so remarkable, and it was in his blueprint. And I guess I'm thinking, what is it in our own blueprints that we can tap into and find?
Yeah. Amazing. Other thoughts? Takeaways? Yeah.
The brothers and I were to the question you brought up. We we had some ideas of what maybe gets in the way of that is like of course like the distractions of this dunya or like ego and stuff like that. A lot of times we have ego because a lot of us never struggle, and without struggle there is no progress. Um, I would say that in regards to my own self, like a reflection, like there was a time in my life where I wasn't always on top of my salah and I wasn't remembering Allah as best as I can. And it took like a situation where I had to also get surgery and like be cut open and be brought to a lowest point in myself to remember Allah. And that instilled in me like conviction to like always be remembered and grateful enough,
Mm.
like um like that in that point to just make sure I don't go back to that way of like forgetting, not being on top of prayer, um, letting meaningless things get in the way of me and my creator. I see that with the prophet as well. Like, you know, he went through these struggles and he had to be cut open, be washed from the inside to then um, ascend to a higher level, you know, and I have to keep the journey going. And from that, he got stronger. Um, I'm pretty sure he gained even more conviction.
Yeah. Right. And he buys into the idea that like this will like elevate me towards something. Do you know? So the idea isn't to like give in to the test in this way as if you're a beast of burden, but like I know I can come out of this stronger. Like it's gonna kind of build me up in some way, right? Any other thoughts?
Just building on to what brother said, I think part of the reason that we see the Prophet Sallam, his complete submission to Allah is also rooted in love, which is that like it's not that he's submitting to Allah and Allah is like the distant being that oh, I'll just submit to him and something good will come out of it. But it's like I mean Allah is the most beloved to him more than anything else, and he knows that whatever struggle he's going through any hardship that he's going through, um, anything that is a distraction of dunya, like none of that compares to the beauty of Allah. And um, and for us, it's I think the takeaway is that we should do our worship and everything that we do primarily in love, and obviously like all the other things that come within that. But love is very important because um, if you know that Allah loves you more than you love yourself, and you know that Allah created you to worship Him not just because um, he just wants to like command you, but also because He loves you, then um, you would be more inclined to submit to Him, even though like we will struggle. But when we see the Prophet Sallam, we see him as the beloved of Allah. yeah, the root of that is love, and it's just cultivating a real love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, subhanAllah. Okay, let's sit with it a bit. There's like a lot more to these hadith. Some of what we talk about next are going to be like people that the Prophet sees, who lived like virtuous lives, who had actions that they did that were not virtuous en route to Jerusalem. And you want to keep in mind that like the chronology of certain things has different opinions to it too. There are hadith that mention certain things, and other hadith mention different things. Allah knows best. But we'll continue like reading through this text that Sheikh puts together of like collated hadith that describe the Al-Isra wal Miraj. I'm trying to think if there's anything happening this week. Does anybody know? is there anything happening this week other than what we normally do?
Tomorrow, Sheikh Fahad has this the Quran reflection.
So Sheikh Fayaz is going to do his halaqah. He typically does on Thursdays, the first and third Thursdays of the month. There's iftar tomorrow also, and if you're a grad student, there's a craft event at 12 o'clock. Friday is Fried Chicken Friday. For people who've been coming like on the weekends for the events that we've been having, how is that? Like, we're trying to do more weekend stuff. Is that good to do? Is it not good to do? It is good to do? Why is it better than weeknights?
Yeah, and I feel like some of us also like we plan to go to events and then like do something after, like grab lunch or dinner.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad you're able to do that by yourselves. Yeah. Oh, that's really nice. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Yeah, we're trying to do more on the weekends and trying to anticipate in terms of kind of future offerings. So people have ideas of things that don't always have to be also just kind of oriented around a panel or a film screening or whatever else. We rely a lot on professional volunteers, given that our community is about 10 or 15,000 people. So if you have a cool idea of something that you feel like could bring people together, I can't guarantee you that we could do it right away, but things we could kind of facilitate with your help would be great. The more that we have people doing stuff, the better. Okay, so why don't we take a pause if you want to put your chairs up against the wall. We'll pray Isha for those who haven't prayed Isha, and we'll see everybody next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.